There are so many men of letters, women of letters, prominent people who have looked at the evidence of 9/11 and concluded scientifically, politically, historically, that the attacks of 9/11 could only be a self-inflicted wound, an inside job. And Professor Stephen Jones is one of the shining lights in this fight to expose government-sponsored terror that's being used to turn our planet into a prison planet. Professor Jones, of course, has written and published in some of the most prestigious scientific peer-reviewed publications in the country. He has engaged in research projects studying different scientific developments for the federal government. He is a doctor of physics from Brigham Young University, and he is trained and taught at many other prestigious institutions around the country. And I would hope tonight he would get a little bit into how he woke up, the evidence of the fact that it's impossible to bring down those towers with simple jet fuel, and then his research of the thermite, thermate. This is one of the most important developments in the last 4 years, almost 5 years, in the fight to expose 9/11. So please welcome him with a warm round of applause. Stand up for him. Took a lot of courage to do what he did. Professor Stephen Jones, Doctor of Physics and Archaeometry, joins us right now for the keynote address. Dr. Jones.
My wife said this evening as we were having a quick bite to eat, I hope you had a bite to eat, she said, you know, Alex reminds me of Patrick Henry. She said, them's fighting words. Them's fighting words. I thought that was pretty good. Okay, so let's see. There we go. Great. That's always a relief to see that the slides are going to work. So I'll present some answers to objections and questions. I will talk about thermite and thermate as we go along. And I decided to take this approach. You know, as I meet people, I get lots of questions. And I thought, well, how about if I answer some of these questions that I get all the time? Okay, the first one is, where is your famous, or some say infamous, paper published? I just am curious how many, and there's the address, or you can Google on, you know, if you Google on Jones thermite, the first thing that comes up is Alex Jones thermite. And I think my paper is second, but that's okay. Okay, you'll see. Just a question. How many of you have had a chance to look at this paper? I just wonder here. Okay, good. Okay, but not everybody. So there's a chance for you to read that. It's in Espanol and Japanese and I think Finnish too right now, but I'm not sure where the Finnish website is. Okay, I'd like to announce tonight the Journal of 9/11 Studies. This now will contain other scholarly papers. I'm very pleased about this. It's just been online since Thursday evening, about 11 o'clock at night. We finally got it online. And I will be quoting from some of the papers. And so as we go along, I'm very pleased about this. Other academics are also providing papers. And this will, and it does, contain now 5 already peer-reviewed papers. And we'll talk about the importance of peer review as we go along, what that means, how it helps us to sort out fact from fiction. It's part of this modern scientific method, really. So a question, how did I get started in my 9/11 studies? I had various nudges over the past several years. Had a friend, Steve Crowley, kept saying, you got to study this, and other friends. I didn't really do too much until I went with my wife. She took me to a lecture by Sarah Monet in Utah. There were about 300 people at this lecture, and Sarah was talking about various things, and she said, if you think those buildings came down on 9/11 just because of a few hijackers hitting the towers, you have major surprises ahead of you. And I thought, and the audience just burst into applause at that, you know, when she said that. And I didn't. I just was sitting there, well, what is she talking about? I don't know what is going on. But you know, you can give nudges. And you think, you have a badge on. I see you've got one, Bob, and that's good. But if you have a badge that reflects 9/11, dang, I forgot my badge. Here I am saying that. But anyway, sorry. But so a little something, bumper sticker, something that gives people nudges. You'd be surprised. You get a few nudges, and then someone looks at it and looks into it. Maybe they'll go to ST911, which is our Scholars for 9/11 Truth site that Jim Fetzer and I co-chair now. Jim was really the founder, and I'm co-chair with that. But anyway, if they get onto a good site, then pretty quick they'll be able to find out for themselves. And that's really what I did. I went to WTC7.net, and I saw the collapse of Building 7 for the first time. And that is what did it for me initially. You know, here it is. On the left is Building 7, and on the right is demolition of a building in Oslo, which looks almost identical. And both of them collapse at near free fall speed, but just a little less. Here we go. Okay, we'll go on a little bit. I want to just talk a little about Building 7. Now, I have quite a few slides. As I was putting this together, and I put quite a few in, and some of these I'm going to go over fast, so I apologize, but like Webster Tarpley, you know, I perceive that I've got to cover a little more than I really expect you to be patient to see. I have 140 slides, I think, I prepared tonight. It's too many, so here we go. Okay. Yeah. All right, we'll see what we can do. Building 7 on the afternoon of 9/11 is shown in the right picture, looking from the old World Trade Center area there. You can see nothing left but debris. But Building 7 stands 47 stories tall. It was about 300 feet away from the North Tower, WTC 1. And there were some fires in the building, but you can see it's not a raging inferno over there by any means. Here, the picture marked C is the building as it looked before 9/11, just to give you an idea of the immensity of this structure. Very solidly built, never hit by a jet, of course. And then after the collapse, it's a nice, neat pile. And it's quite remarkable, actually, to get such a nice, what we call an implosion, bringing that building onto its own footprint. And as I studied this, I learned about the 9/11 Truth movement, which is large and growing. This photo was one of the better ones I've seen regarding our movement, and it was in the New York Times just after the Chicago meeting. So, you know, we're getting some publicity that's mixed, but anyway, it's coming. Okay, here's the first paper in the new Journal of 9/11 Studies, and it has to do with World Trade Center 7. It's a computation on the free fall by Professor Kenneth Cutler, professor of mathematics at my university. So, you know, we've become friends. But he did this on his own. I had no idea Ken was working on this calculation. Here's the equation that he derives. We'll spend some time explaining that. No. I won't bother you. Okay, no. This is the equation. This is a very serious paper. It's short and terse. When you look at it, you'll see Ken doesn't waste a lot of words. He uses equations and comes to some conclusions. Let me go back to his introduction, actually, which talks about the conclusions. A short computation, he says, focused on Building 7, favorable assumptions for achieving a fast fall, including ignoring resistance due to intact steel columns. You see, so that's ignoring a lot. He still could only get the building to fall in about 8.3 seconds, whereas the observed roof fall time, this is a corner of the roof that he's looking at, 6.5 seconds. So, and he uses conservation momentum and pursues the collapse that way. When one floor hits another, the first floor is slowed down because the floor it hits is stationary. Just like when you bump into a car, you know. I wouldn't wish this, but it all happens to most of us. You slow down when you hit that. So same thing. And you just calculate using conservation momentum, and it takes longer than what the building required. So his point is that something had to move these floors below out of the way so that this building could fall that fast. And he goes through the calculation. And in a footnote, his paper says, any further analysis of the collapse of Building 7 should include all floors, not just floors 8 to 46, and conservation momentum considerations. Both of those have to be included, you see. Now, why would he, and there's a little footnote here. Does anybody know why he says you have to include all the floors, not just floors 8 to 46? Why does the paper? Yeah, Rilla. Oh, no, there's more to it than that. He says that's all you can see because of the foreground. Okay, let me show you what it says in this reference. If you look it up, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, had decoupled their study of Building 7 from the study of the towers. Now, their report on Building 7 is not out. It's been delayed, and they finally contracted with ARA. I can't remember the name of the company, but it's ARA in Albuquerque, to analyze the collapse of Building 7. And here is what they said that this subcontract to ARA would have them do. Create detailed floor analyses to determine likely modes of failure for floors 8 to 46 due to failure of one or more supporting columns. Now, look, folks, this building is 47 stories. Why did they say, we only want you to analyze floors 8 to 46? Well, I'm not quite sure, but you know, I mean, in Cutler's paper, he says, look, I considered all the floors. If you're going to do a decent job, you have to consider all the floors. I have a guess why they didn't consider the lower floors. Because there's some funny business going on. They also, NIST won't so far release to us the photos or any videos that they have regarding Building 7, and I believe that if they did, we'd find some evidence of some real funny business. But now, with this publication, you see what this does. It says, okay, we've studied it. When you analyze it, you now have to consider this because it's a published paper. It's been peer-reviewed. And in your analysis, ARA, you have to consider these factors. If you don't, we're watching. You know, this is not good science. And furthermore, this business already of limiting, you know, it's putting blinders on, don't look at anything but floors 8 to 46. I'm just appalled that NIST would provide such an unscientific restriction. Come on, people, we got to look at all the data and not just floors 8 to 46, okay? That's amazing. It's just remarkable, you know, from a scientific point of view, they do that, but they did. Okay, if a collapse is started, what happens next? You ever think about that? So let's grant somehow the tower starts to collapse. What happens next? There's a paper in the journal, 9/11 Studies, that considers this question. Analysis by Gordon Ross, who has degrees in mechanical engineering and manufacturing engineering. The analysis shows that, this is in his conclusion, that despite the assumptions made in favor of collapse continuation, vertical movement of the falling section, this is the portion above where the planes hit, would be arrested prior to completion of the 3% shortening phase of the impacted columns. And again, he's got the equations, the data to back all this up. A collapse driven only by gravity would not continue to progress beyond that point. Now, what he's saying, this mechanical engineer, is that, wait a minute, folks, we got to, you know, it's not just enough to get it to start collapsing. You have to see what happens next. Now, what does NIST say? In their report, which they put out, was last October, as I recall, September or October, NIST said their report on the towers The focus of the investigation was on the sequence of events from the instant of aircraft impact to the initiation of the collapse of each tower. For brevity, this sequence is referred to as the probable collapse sequence, although it does not actually include the structural behavior of the tower after the conditions for collapse initiation were reached. In other words, we only take it to the point where things get started. No more. Again, the old blinders are on. On page 142, they express the same thing. Their computer simulation, which they resorted to because their models, back up a second, the NIST actually contracted with Underwriter Laboratories to build models of the World Trade Center floor trusses and test them, the floor assemblies, and subject them to severe fire tests. What happened? They did not fail. Now, there was some warping. It didn't fail. The building wouldn't even start to collapse according to the fire tests. Those are actual experiments, which I like. That was a good thing to do, but the buildings didn't collapse, you see. But so then they went to computer simulations and they got things to fail, but only to the point where it starts to collapse. Excuse me. What happens after that? I'm a scientist. I want to know, does this thing keep going or does it stop? NIST. The results were a simulation, again, they resorted to that, of the structural deterioration of each tower from the time of the aircraft impact to the time at which the building became unstable, i.e., was poised for collapse. Now, what Gordon Ross here is saying, the mechanical engineer, is saying, look, we'll take it the next step. We'll see. And he uses conservation momentum and conservation of energy. These are laws of physics, the fundamental laws of science now, conserving energy and momentum. And he says, here's what happens when you look at all the energy losses and everything. It drops, and then it just stops. It's like, I woke up this morning thinking about this paper, okay? I don't know. And but there's an analogy that came to me because it's in his. It isn't, this particular analogy isn't there, but the math is there. So what if you think of the towers as the 240 perimeter columns as a big spring? Because see, what he's saying is it flexes when you hit it. It flexes. That's like a spring. Okay, there's some give to it, and in the center of the tower, there's another spring, 47 support columns up the center. So what you got is nested springs, and when you drop a block, and if I had a chance to go to a store to buy some big springs, I would. Okay, big spring, a small spring in the center, that's your model. You drop a block on it, what happens? Well, it just disintegrates. No, it doesn't just disintegrate, It gives, and that's his point. It gives. I mean, I suppose it's possible it could, but as he goes through the math, it doesn't disintegrate. It gives, and then that's it. The collapse does not continue. Amazing paper. I hope that he'll be here and give me a break. I'll listen to Gordon talk and explain it a little more. So we call the NIST final report, this is a forum we have in our scholars group, the official pre-collapse theory. Because it doesn't really talk about the collapse. It's only pre-collapse, you see. So this is the pre-collapse theory. And Gordon Ross has given us the official theory now. The rest of the way, it just doesn't proceed. Isn't that interesting? I thought that was a fantastic paper, and I hope you'll read it. Now, a little bit on demolition. I decided at the last minute to pull up these slides, which I used last September when I first spoke about this subject at BYU. And this is how you take down a building with explosives. Okay? And if you look at the building on the right, you see the jets or plumes of gas and debris coming off the side. And we call these squibs. That's how the terminology we use a lot. And you see the squibs, and others have pointed this out earlier today, so I won't spend much time on that. Let's see, do I have a pointer? You can see the squibs though, can't you? Here's one. You can see that one real clearly. And notice this one. They tend to be in the center of the building, or maybe stretched across the center some, but my pointer's gone somewhere. There we go. Anyway, this one's right in the center. This is an interesting one. Very obviously high energy, and you see the debris it's carrying with it. You see that? I can't keep my pointer going, but in the squib you see some debris carried with that. Oh, I'll talk more about super thermite as we go on. Now, see, so I don't want to read all of this, but the green, let's read some of this. Sometimes, though, a building is surrounded by structures that must be preserved. In this case, the blasters proceed with a true implosion, demolishing the building so that it collapses straight down into its own footprint. Now, this is not easier. It's much easier to put explosives and have the building topple over. A law of probability. And that's what I mean when I say the law of increasing entropy. I've been in question about that. What I'm talking about is the probabilities here. I'm using it in the broad sense of this law. That is, there's much more opportunities for the final state to be toppled over than just straight down. There's only one of those, and there's a lot of others, you see. So that's what I mean. This feat of bringing a building straight down onto its own footprint requires such skill that only a handful of demolition companies in the world will attempt it. Well, what the heck? Just put a few random fires in there, maybe some damage, and you saw the towers, they just fall straight down. I mean, what's all this? What, you know, see what I'm saying? What's all this? Right? Okay. And you better patent that one real quick before somebody else thinks about it. You know, just some random fires in the building. Hey, it'll come straight down. It's great. You know, quit paying these companies all this money. Okay. No, seriously, when you demolish a building, and this is the point. You see, look at the picture there. You can read if you want, but I'm not going to spend too much time. But the point is important that the way the blasters generally proceed is first and second blasts are way down low. You pull out the supports. Pull is the term. Yeah. You pull those supports on these columns. Remember, these huge columns are supporting this building. Well, you've got to weaken the building. And sometimes they do pre-cutting, actually. They go in and cut the supports, weaken things before. Or you can do it, as it says here, with blasts, which I think Willie Rodriguez, right? He was down in the sub-basement area of the tower. Was that the North Tower? And he hears this huge explosion just before the plane hit, he reported. Okay? Now, why would you do that? Well, you want to weaken the building down low, you see. Now, the official theory is that all the weakening due to planes, a plane in each tower, and then fires, all of that was in the upper levels. Huh? So again, it won't work. I mean, okay, so let's see if okay, let's look at some squibs, very rapid fall, and now you know what's going on. They're destroying the lower, the internal columns way down first, and that's consistent totally with what Willie Rodriguez reported, yeah? His observation. And he said, I asked him, did you hear of other explosions? Yes, and others reported it too, around floors 8 and so on. So that's just what you expect. You got to cut those lower columns. Now here's another way then to do controlled demolition if the official theory is correct. I mean, you know, the planes hit up high, floor 80 for the South Tower and floor, was it 90 something for the North Tower. So think of it. All you have to do is put a few explosions in the upper floors. Don't worry about the sub-basement columns. And set off the explosions. Do it randomly, because after all, the fires and the jets, that was just random damage. Just set a few off randomly on the upper floors, and lo and behold, watch that building come crashing straight down. No, it won't work. Of course, Gordon Ross directly approached that. But you know, can you see how it's really quite? I mean, it's just such a stretch. Now, I actually interviewed what the official story is. It's just a stretch. And I'm glad to see people like Gordon Ross saying, okay, it's kind of crazy what you're saying, but I'm going to go through and look at conservation of energy, conservation of momentum, the fundamental bedrock laws of physics, and we will see what happens if you start, I'll give it to you, let that whole block just start all at once somehow, just as a whole block, nothing in the way, collapse down. What happens? And what happens is the other columns below are cold. You know, there's not all this fire down below. Well, they're strong, and they give. Yeah, it's like a spring. It's a real stiff spring, but they give. And they're interconnected, and it's like a tree, you know, it gives. In fact, it's designed to give against winds, and it's like a tree, as the way Professor Wood puts it. Judy Wood, she's the co-editor with me on this new journal, and she's at Clemson University, a mechanical engineer. Anyway, it's a structure that those internal columns give, okay? So again, the spring analogy. Okay, so I just thought a little humor would help here. You know, this guy's got these equations and the result, and then in the middle he's got a miracle occurs, you know. Well, okay. Well, you know, that's kind of the official story, you know. Well, we saw the fires and we saw the collapse, so obviously we don't know what happened in between, but, you know, a miracle occurred. It takes science to sort that out. Okay. Someone mentioned, in fact, it was Jim Fetzer, my co-chair there on the scholars group. He mentioned this 9/11 myths. Let me see. How many of you have visited that site? Anyway, just a few. Okay. But they basically espouse the official story, finally, as you read it. And there's an example down there in red, so you can see. Silverstein lost money, and is what they claim in this site. Somehow he lost money even though he got a $4.6 billion settlement. Now this again is a stretch, you know, but they promote that sort of argument. It's kind of like a continuation, this site is a continuation of the popular mechanics type of argument, right? Just a lot of, well, let's read what Rick Ratcher, he's at MIT, says about this. I will focus on this is a preview, it's not published yet. I will focus on the methodology of the arguments put forth in 9/11myths.com. Give the top 10 examples of half-truths, false information, speculation, but no substance. And so he'll write an article on the art of discernment. This is something we all need to learn. Take down the key and critical arguments that collapses the entire deck of cards. So, to give you an idea of what sort of things we're doing in this journal. We do take critiques seriously, and he will be answering those. Question arises, what else do I do besides 9/11? Not much lately. Although we did get a house, my wife and I did get a house in the country, which we kind of like. We're trying to get a little more self-sufficient, you know, independent. Okay, so, but here's the thing. Now, Ye Samaki visited me, and I gave him, he and his companion there, both from Mali, Africa, gave them some of our solar cookers, which I invented about 1998. You see the parabola there, and I discussed this more in Chicago. Here's some data. I mention this partly because, just to show you what else I do, partly, but also to say I've worked in the energy field, solar and fusion energy, doing research in those two areas for essentially all my career. When I started at BYU, I was thick into what's called muon catalyzed fusion. And the other fact is we may need these type of cookers. As you know, as I was listening to Alex talk tonight, there's also, you can write that down if you want, the solarcooking.org, a good group. Anybody, well, hopefully, are there any solar cookers out there? I've cooked a lot of meals with this. Anybody else by any chance? Okay, yes. Girl Scouts, all right. Did you use a box cooker? Okay, but this funnel cooker is much faster. Box cooker will cook food. It works. It's, gosh, about 120 or at least years ago. That was a box. And you let the sun in through a window on the top. It's well insulated. And it takes 3 or 4 hours typically to cook food in those things. The solar funnel cooker will cook food in about an hour and a half, except beans. And even those, if you soak them overnight, an hour and a half. Okay, as you can see. And on the right, there's, and also lower left, a cooker that uses charcoal briquettes. So on rainy days, you have a backup. Now, here's what I was thinking as I was listening to Alex talk. And we'll talk about the dust. I'll go over it kind of quickly, though, tonight because of, we're all getting probably a little tired. Some are hungry. My wife got me a treat, so I'm not real hungry, fortunately. But I know some of you are. But anyway, the point is, I had to agree with Alex. It's clear from this dust episode, this highly toxic dust, and the thousands that are sick, many are dying. Some have already died because of this toxic World Trade Center dust. Okay, the point is, our leaders seem willing to lie to us to our hurt. Now, this is not a pleasant situation. And it occurred to me as he was talking, what would they do? We take for granted our infrastructure, electricity, water, transportation. What if they cut, just an example, what if, to get us to buckle under, for example, I don't know, they don't like us, made them mad somehow. But if they cut off the grid, cut the power, bing's gone. I don't have my flashlight with me, so we're all stuck, but we could probably make our way out. Now, when the power is off, it's very difficult to cook food. We have electric stoves, but even if you have a gas stove, well, a gas stove actually you probably could, because you could light it with a match. But how about your furnace? That has a thermostat. It's not going to work it won't work without electricity. So we get stuck in a hurry. Well, you can take care of heat with warm clothing. And I'm sorry, I just don't think that we can take for granted that our grid is going to last. It's actually quite fragile. I don't know, in Southern California, are you still having the rolling blackout thing? No? It's gone. They fixed it? Enron did that to you. Okay, well, they didn't like you, I guess. But anyway, the point is, it could happen again, as much as we hate to admit it. And the solar cooker is one way to prepare so you can cook food. You're independent of the grid. You don't have to be afraid of them saying, we got your grid cut off, but, we blame it on Iran. And, so wait a minute. I don't need the grid because I've made some preparations. Okay, so we share values. And I noticed Alex talking about this too. We share values of truth, caring for others. We care about long-term concerns. We love our country, our Constitution. These are values that prepare us in this struggle in which we're engaged. And these are my motivations here. Okay, this is the next question. Doesn't your work on cold fusion discredit you? I'll let you be the judge. Published a paper in Scientific American with Professor Johann Rafalski, a good friend of mine, who is Jewish, by the way, a very good friend of mine, in July of '87. So it goes back a ways. And notice the title of our article, Cold Nuclear Fusion. Now this is talking about muon catalyzed fusion, which I won't go into in detail, but it really works. There's no question about it. We achieved the record that still stands today, 150 plus or minus 20 fusions per muon. And this is it's an elementary particle, and during its lifetime we get 150 fusions, which is quite good. That's about 3,000 MeV of energy released. So, yeah. Okay, in April of 1989, we published a paper. Notice Rafalski is with us again, and colleagues at BYU, on a different type of cold fusion. But it's still, cold fusion just simply means fusion at room temperature. So the sun has hydrogen in it, and the centers of the atoms, the nuclei, come together and stick. That's fusion. Energy is released. And of course the sun, that's hot fusion. And we're talking about fusion at room temperature, or below actually, but approximately room temperature. Our record was achieved in liquid deuterium, tritium. Those are forms of hydrogen. But anyway, in liquid, so it was at about 21 Kelvin. It was very cold. But that's where we had the record number of fusions with muon catalyzed. Now here we're talking about fusion in metals and fusion in the earth. And so it's published in a peer-reviewed article. Of course, this is Nature. It's one of the most prestigious, along with Scientific American, publications in the world. And it was peer-reviewed, 4 reviewers. I assure you, this was not an easy thing to get this paper published. It was published. And 9 years later, we have Kasagi, and then shortly after Zursky, confirming finally our results with 100% reproducibility, which is one of the touchstones of good science. You have to be able to do it every time. And gosh, that makes me think about the towers. You know, there's so many examples of fire and damage in buildings where they didn't collapse. In fact, all except on 9/11. And so where's the repeatability for these guys? You know, I mean, if fire will bring a building down, why didn't it happen at the LA Bank building? You know, and well, the tower itself, one of the towers that had a tremendous fire, and the Madrid building, and the building in Caracas, and so on. You know, these huge structures with fires, they never collapse totally. Now there's partial, of course, collapse. That's different. But I'm talking about total, straight down collapse. That's only 3 World Trade Center buildings. Repeatability. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So those are interested in cold or metal catalyzed fusion, which is not all of you, probably taken a chance to read that, so I'll go on. But just to say, the method here, what finally, see, in science generally, you do experiments, and finally you get something that's a breakthrough. You nail it. We say the question mark is gone on metal catalyzed fusion. It really works, and here's a little more data. I mean, we expect the materials on the right, for example, that whole list, those behave like theory predicted they would. Our hypothesis, which goes back to 85, a paper we published in Journal of Physics G, is that no, their metals should catalyze, that is, enhance nuclear fusion. Some metals will do better than others. I realize you're not too excited about that. Maybe you are. I'm excited about this. Okay. Finally, confirmed after 9 years. Like it's been 5 years since 9/11. I'm sorry I was late getting started, but we'll get this problem solved. Okay, now, so what is the scientific method? Alex asked me that. And I thought this is a good thing to go through because some of us need a little refresher. We've seen it in school, most of us. But, you know, we get all these ideas, and some of them, you know, I realized the question, did planes hit the towers or not? That's the one that's kind of divisive. And also, you know, what hit the Pentagon? That can be divisive too. I've noticed that. Okay, so how do we proceed to sort out fact from fiction? First, in science, we gather observations. We look at the data. We make some hypothesis. It's okay to speculate. That's the next step, really. The third step is crucial, and this is the key to the modern scientific method. We perform experiments to test our hypothesis. Okay? And that generates data. Now your guesses can't just be all over the place. You know, you're stuck. You have to make sure your hypothesis fits the data. And very often this requires a refinement of your hypothesis and more experiments. So that iteration goes on some right there, doing experiments, refining your hypothesis. And finally, you publish in a peer-reviewed journal. Now that step has been in place since the time of Isaac Newton and was worked out by the scientists as a way of putting discipline in investigations. Okay, so I mean, for let's see. So I can count on probably about 20 peer-reviewed publications now. I'll show you. Not quite that many available to us yet, but there's, anyway, I'll show you where you can find those. These are the ones that have been peer-reviewed. Means if I've got a PhD, then other PhDs have to review my papers, basically. Okay? And so it's a peer. It's someone that knows about what you're talking about. Okay, and they review your paper. So the paper that you have online that I wrote, it was reviewed, actually went through 2 peer review processes, and I don't think I'll go through the reasons why that happened, but the last time it was reviewed by 4 PhDs, 2 of whom were physicists. That's peer review. And I'll tell you, my paper changed substantially what you see now on the internet from what was first there last November. And a large part of that change was because of this peer review process. It's a very, very good thing. And so if somebody says to you, well, let's see, what's something they say? Well, let me think. I'm trying to think of some off the wall. Without offending. Okay, you know, there's these missiles, maybe a shot from pods underneath the jet. Okay, that's a possibility. But there's nothing peer-reviewed out there on that. And if someone writes up a paper, they submit it to our journal, that's great. We'll send it out to people to review. These guys then will say, oh, wait, did you think about the bump on the, you know, it exists on the jet? Reflections, the fact that when aluminum hits a plane, it's going to tend to scatter and it could even catch on fire. I mean, you know, did you think about those things? And, you know, I'll give you an initial burst. You probably haven't heard that, but that's just something that comes to mind. So that the point is you get the input, and so it's a filter. So you have these ideas, and in order to be published, you have to go through this filter, which is like running the gauntlet, and then you have peer-reviewed papers. Okay. So here's the scientific method then generally is we start with the facts and we determine what conclusions can we withdraw from those facts. The unscientific method, we start with a conclusion and then we find facts to support it. And you laugh, but this happens all the time. And so now you say, wait a minute. What is I put on the book there, Muslims did it. I put that there. That's the foregone conclusion. You know, Muslims did it, we must attack Afghanistan and Iraq. That's the conclusion. Just find facts to support it. This is called, I call it putting on the blinders. We only look at facts that support the conclusion. This is bad science. Another example of extremely bad science is the steel shipped to Asia, melted down and destroyed. So here we have this ancient scientist. After years of relentless study, laborious research, and numeral calculations, I have ascertained that no 2 snowflakes, there's 2 snowflakes that are exactly alike. So what does he do? Right. He just destroys the evidence, right? Now this is called pathological science. In fact, if you read down there at the bottom, extremely pathological science to destroy evidence. But this is what they did, and we need to call them on that. That's extremely bad science, and I hope, you know, as we proceed now with scholarly studies, we must insist that no more data be destroyed. Okay, so you can ask then, when some idea comes along, has that idea passed peer review and been published? It brings discipline, you see, and helps sort out fact from fiction. That's one of the main things I wanted to talk about tonight. So we have the Journal of 9/11 Studies. There are 5 papers in there. We have the Hidden History of 9/11, 2001, Paul Zaremka, a professor. And this is in Research in Political Economy. That just came out last month. It's available on paper form, book. And David Ray Griffin's book, this is the one that my paper will appear in. My paper is also published in Global Outlook, which I appreciate Ian publishing that. So that's available. Okay, now the question I get, are there any publications that support you or refute you? Structural engineers in the new civil engineer, as soon as the NIST report came out, jumped on this. They pointed out as a well-respected Civil Engineering Journal. World Trade Center disaster investigators at NIST are refusing to show computer visualizations of the collapse of the towers, despite calls from leading structural and fire engineers. This is a serious rebuke or complaint, you see, against the NIST report. Let's read down here. NIST should really show the visualizations. This is University of Manchester professor of structural engineering, Colin Bailey. Otherwise, the opportunity to correlate back to the video evidence and identify errors in the modeling will be lost. Well, they just refused to do that. A leading U.S. structural engineer, not named, said the software used by NIST, remember, all they had finally was a software model because the real models didn't fail, you know. Please keep that one in mind. That's a good one. You know, when you're on the radio, yeah, well, they built models, you know, and when they subjected them to extreme fire conditions, these are World Trade Center tower models, you know, floor assemblies, they did not fail in actual fire tests. So yeah, those are experiments. That's solid data. And that, by the way, pointing that out is what got Kevin Ryan fired, you know, he said, wait a minute, these are actual experiments, you know. All right. And these guys, these engineers here are complaining about the lack of routine visualizations, which are done with the finite element modeling that NIST did. So, FEMA report, likewise. I just look at in the middle there. Respected members of the fire protection engineering community are beginning to raise red flags. The structural damage from the planes and the explosive ignition of jet fuel in themselves were not enough to bring down the towers. Fire engineering has good reason to believe that the official investigation blessed by FEMA is a half-baked farce that may already have been commandeered by political forces whose primary interests, to put it mildly, lie far afield of full disclosure. Now, those are not just mild, you know, complaints. Those are, you know, calling a report a half-baked farce is as strong a language as I've ever seen. You see? I mean, it's not like I'm alone in this. This is not crazy to challenge the official story. Okay, now here's something I'm quite sure you haven't seen before. This is published in a newspaper, Provo, where I live, Daily Herald. A letter to the editor by Alan Firmage. I mean, he signed his name. He's an emeritus professor, civil engineer, and he's retired. He says, I feel obligated to reply to his conspiracy theory. He's talking about my report. And now in yellow, the structural design of the towers was unique in that the supporting steel structure consisted of closely spaced columns in the walls of all four sides, just the sides. The resulting structure was similar to a tube. And then his argument is based on that. Now, folks, this is just wrong. Look at the photos. You've seen them. Is this a hollow? Okay, yes, there are 240 perimeter columns. It's fair to say that's like a tube. But what the heck is that in the middle? You know, those 47 core columns. And that's been the nemesis for these official explanations since day one. And it's what Gordon Ross says, you know, where the big block hits that, man, it's going to give, but it's not going to collapse. Yeah? It's strong. It's cool below there, huh? This is very important to realize this is not just a tube. Now, I got this, you know, early on as engineer, another structural engineer at BYU came over to my office. He said, well, look, Steve, you got to understand these towers were unique. They're like tubes. And I'm saying, no, I don't. He said, yeah, let me give you an example. He said, you take a pop can, he said, and you stand on it, and then when you have somebody just tap it, the thing will, because you're standing on it, it'll just collapse. And my thought was, well, what if you put, let me think, how can I explain this? A railroad spike in the middle of that thing, you know? I mean, it's not a hollow tube. And that, you see, but this is where they get this idea, and you have to, have you seen that, Chris? Hollow tube? Yeah, you talk. It's not a hollow tube. So you have to start with some very fundamental facts. And I mean, if you tried to publish this in a peer-reviewed journal, I hope the reviewers would say, well, you know, I've seen the pictures. These are straight out of my paper, by the way, these 2 photos. And others have shown them today. And then he goes on. I won't go into this. But again, notice he talks about a conspiracy theory, the start and finish, you know, which is kind of an ad hominem way of saying, don't even look at this, I suppose. Okay. Okay, what data finally convinced you that 9/11 was not just by 19 hijackers? You know, the final convincing was this molten metal that I learned about. And so here's a picture. It takes a minute to come up, but this one has been stabilized and shows the, oh, he didn't change the word. It's not steel. At least not mostly. It's mostly iron, I'm confident, as I'll explain. But you see that yellow hot molten metal in abundance pouring out of the south tower just minutes before its collapse. And as you get to see when it actually collapses, it fails at the same spot. I mean, it twists and buckles at the same spot. So this molten metal is a very significant event in the history. Oh, look at the white smoke coming off. Did you see that? That ash. That is totally consistent, again, with thermite, the yellow to white hot molten metal. And as the metal splashes against the cement, the columns there, you see the white interior. I mean, it's extremely hot, this molten metal. Here's a picture. It's mentioned in an appendix, a NIST report. I'm going to start talking about thermite. And I'm using the term thermite generally. If you add sulfur and some other goodies, yeah, that's thermate. But I'm just going to, it's the thermite class. And so I'm just going to use the term thermite for thermite class. The technical word is aluminothermics. So that's a mouthful. I'll just say thermite class reactions. But characteristic of thermite burning is this unusual flame. It's actually a reaction. It's white. You see it there in the middle? Between the 80 and the 83, right between there, that white, hot reaction region. And then again, the white dust coming off. Well, that's just what you expect with thermite reactions. Pardon? It's about 4 minutes it starts, and then it continues for several minutes. I mean, this is a lot of molten material. Thanks. Not just a cutting. Yeah, but it's pouring out of there. Yeah. Okay. So the plume of smoke that comes off now is this white ash. NIST says that this is consistent with it being molten aluminum. But when I first saw that, I had worked with molten aluminum previously, and molten aluminum at all temperatures, I mean up to when the pot, which is steel, is yellow hot, you pour out the aluminum still looks silvery. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little. We'll show you those photos, but it doesn't look yellow hot aluminum when it's pouring in daylight conditions. I'll skip that one. Dr. Pitts said it's probably, okay, molten aluminum from the plane. Somehow got across the floor, some distance away, flowed, and somehow got up to yellow hot. Now, aluminum melts at a temperature which would be red hot temperature. It melts about 600 centigrade. And so, but yellow hot is around 1,000, 1,100 centigrade. And so, how do you get it up hotter? And even if you do get it hotter, it still looks silvery. I mean, this notion that this could be aluminum from the plane is just really not going to pass peer review. Okay. So, but anyway, to check things, we do experiments. That's a hypothesis. Could be molten aluminum. We check it with an experiment. We poured the aluminum. It stayed silvery, straw gray at all temperatures. But the molten metal from the WTC was clearly yellow to white hot, and it thus could not be molten aluminum. We then did some other things. There's a fellow, Dr. Greening, said, well, maybe aluminum, molten aluminum, when you put that on rusty steel, you'll get a kind of a thermite reaction. We tried it. We did not get those highly exothermic reactions. And I have a paper, which I hope to get into the Journal of 9/11 Studies. It'll be easier for you to find. But it hasn't gone through peer. I need to repair. See, when you go through peer review, I expect I've got to have that well-worded, carefully done. You know, that's where we sort out fact from fiction, is through peer review. Okay, so here's this cup now, steel, which we heated to orange yellow hot, as you can, I think, see in the picture. And then as we poured the molten aluminum out, the aluminum still looks silvery. Okay, thermite, aluminum powder plus iron oxide, which gives you the aluminum oxide, which is the white plume, and molten iron. Now so here's a little more detail on that. I threw this in at the last. Thermite type reactions. You always have aluminum powder. And if it's just finely divided, you get incendiary. This means it reacts slowly, and it can cause fire, and it can melt through structural steel, but it's slow. There's no explosion heard with an incendiary because there's no explosion. It's slower than that. Now, on the other hand, if you go to ultrafine aluminum powder, there's a little chemistry here. It's very important, though. And also ultrafine the metal oxide on the other side, iron oxide typically used. I list some other oxides. Anyway, then it will explode. So thermite, again, you know, there's this whole range of materials you can add into the thermite. I've listed in there. And then the fineness of the powder determines whether it burns slowly as an incendiary or immediately and as an explosion. You can do it both ways. Okay? So thermite is extremely versatile. And I would add that there are no tagans. Now, I'll come back on tagans, but in conventional explosives like TNT, RDX, HMX, there's a tag, a chemical tag. So when the explosive goes off, the tag survives. Investigators can come and look, and they say, oh, this has got some, this tag in it. Tagant is the term they formally use. And now we can determine where this explosive was purchased, and blah, we catch the guy. But with thermite, there are no tags. Very clever stuff. Aha. Okay. Look at all the oxides you can use too. Very versatile. I mean, you can mix it up and make it do all sorts of things. Okay, so we did experiments with thermite. On the right, you see this there at BYU. And this was actually my daughter, bless her heart, got me going on this. She did this for a science fair project. I want to do thermite, And I said, okay, Shelley, yeah. And so, here we are. And I see the white ash coming off. It's really quite dramatic. Now this, she had a stopwatch, and she said, okay, we'll time how long it takes for the thermite to slice through the steel cup that we had it in. And so, we tried timing it, but you know what? We added sulfur. We just went to that reaction first. So it was really thermate, and it was through it. And you couldn't even, it was just through, and there's this white hot molten iron dripping out the bottom of the steel cup within just a fraction of a second. We couldn't time it. It cuts so fast. And of course, thicker steel, it will take a little bit longer. Sure, could take a few seconds. Well, you can actually time it. Okay. So we compare this molten metal, this white to yellow hot molten metal, with our experiments, and the white ash drifting off, and gosh, they look very much the same. Now that was the condition. Oh, yes. We've done more experiments now on this. It's just it's like Alex was saying, as you get more data, it just keeps adding and adding, leading to the same conclusion. Thermite was deliberately planted in these buildings. That's the conclusion we're tending towards. Okay. Yeah. In fact, I'm just going to mention this as it comes to mind. So there's another professor at BYU, Professor Campbell, young, bright, very clever physicist. And he had heard I was doing these experiments, and I'll show you the data in a minute. We've actually analyzed now the the composition using an electron microprobe and other methods. But anyway, he says, well, how's it going? And I said, well, it's mostly iron. It's not, there's little aluminum, but it's not much. He says, so it's not, molten aluminum. I said, yeah. And then he said, well, what else you got in there? Well, there's very little chromium. He says, it's not the structural steel that melted. No, it's looking like thermite, isn't it? Yeah, what else you got in there? I said, it's got sulfur in it. He said, well, what does that do? He didn't know. So I said, well, when you put sulfur in, now when that molten iron hits the structural steel, it makes the steel melt much faster because it forms a eutectic. Oh yeah, eutectic, of course, it'll just slice right through that stuff. And he says, that's exciting, you're getting results, we're finding out. And he said, oh, but that means... And he said, and he did. He reacted just like that. And he said, well, I'm excited for your results, but I'm sad for our country, is what he said. She's a good man. And that was true, too. That's what he... Okay, so you've looked at that. And now here's a question that gets raised. So the question is, was thermite used in the cleanup? See, this is a legitimate question. So I asked Robert Moore, who's one of our scholars, and he has looked at hundreds, probably thousands of photographs. And he says, I've seen no evidence for the use of thermite by rescue workers or the cleanup crew. Much of their work has been photographed and is widely available. Why would they create hotspots around other more significant hotspots? As you know, there's this molten metal. Most of you know that. I'll show some more on that. In fact, you see it here already. This yellow hot stuff before cleanup began, and Sarah Atlas saying the molten metal, she thought it was steel, and by the way, Loiseau thought it was steel too, but no, we've now analyzed it. This is molten metal, primarily iron. There's some component of steel when you slice through steel, but not much. Anyway, this molten metal flowed in the pile of ruins, still settling beneath our feet. This is one of the very first responders that got there. And you see this molten stuff kind of settling in the pile. They used a lot of thermite, looks to me like. Anyway, why would they use thermite in a cleanup? This would be pretty crazy. It's extremely dangerous stuff, very hot. But somebody raised it. It's just an example of one of these, I call it off-the-wall ideas. Somebody said, whoa, maybe they use thermite in the cleanup. Well, these enormous pools, we see the metal flowing out of the building. Even in cleanup, that's not going to explain that, and so on. Now, they did use oxyacetylene torches. This is part of our answer. Thermal lances also could have been used, and probably where we're trying to pin that down. Michael Berger, a friend of mine, is looking into that with one of the workers there. Just so you know, a thermal lance, this I learn when I answer these questions, so I don't mind them totally, even if they're off the wall. A thermal lance, or thermic lance, or burning bar, this is out of Wikipedia, is a tool which burns iron in an oxygen environment. Now, this is not thermite or thermate at all. It's burning iron, literally, in an oxygen. So you have, you see the tube that guy's got? He's got oxygen flowing up the tube, and you're actually burning a metal, iron, generally. And that will allow you to cut through structural steel, too. This, however, will not be confused with thermite. The residue is not like thermite. Of course, this would not be any confusion to us. Okay, let's go on. Here's one of these big chunks of previously molten metal. Huge quantities of the stuff. And here's another one you probably haven't seen. I wish we had more photos with detail, but you see this flowing material. It's kind of brassy looking in this view. Found at ground zero. Enormous quantities of this.
This is how it's been since day one. Oh, it's unbelievable. And this is 6 weeks later, almost 6 weeks later. And as we get closer to the center of this, it gets hotter and hotter. It's probably 1,500 degrees. We've had some small windows into what we thought was a core at some point, and it looked like an oven. It was just roaring inside. And it's just a bright reddish orange color. See that stuff he's pulling out? What was that, Chief? We're gonna hold off on the water. See the stuff he's pulling out? Yeah. It's red hot. If we hit it too much steam, you won't be able to see what he's doing.
Great. Yeah, and so you see, even weeks later, this metal as it's being pulled out. There's this red, orange, hot metal still being pulled out. Enormous pools under both towers and Building 7. Remember, Building 7 wasn't hit by a plane. And here's a photo of a chunk of this material from the South Tower, about a 40-pound chunk. It's about 9 inches square and about 3 or 4 inches deep. And we have now a small sample brought to BYU for analysis, but I'm going to keep you on pins and needles just for a minute. I want to answer another question, which actually relates to this. Have you received any threats or bribes? Well, you be the judge. Here's what the guy says. There was a mechanical engineer, as soon as my paper came out, wrote to me and BYU administrators and engineers. He says, I'm quoting now from his email to, remember, not just me, but BYU administrator, the publication of this article can be stopped. I have the contacts to make this happen if necessary. I prefer to give you opportunity, speaking to me, to consider the consequences. You need to give this very serious consideration. This is an issue that is more important than any individual career. I think he was referring to my career. I'm very sure he was talking about that. Now, we had some give and take on scientific issues, which I welcome. And he admitted, as you see, we've talked about the squibs coming off. He said the North Tower squibs are interesting, are more interesting, and deserve more attention. They're quite similar to the material ejected at the Southwark Towers. If I can get this thing to show it again. Here's the Southwark Tower collapse. Watch the squibs, and you'll see, indeed, it's reminiscent of the North Tower. See, squibs coming off the center of the columns, and down they go. So he says, yeah, I admit, something, but but then, December, I regret that you're still trying to publish your paper. In other words, shut up and get it off. There was enormous pressure for me to pull my paper off the internet for about a month. This guy was a large part of that. The fact that a paper passes peer review, which mine had been, and is accepted for publication, which mine had been, should not be viewed as validation of ideas unless the peer reviewers are really qualified to perform the peer review. He's challenging the peer review. And some of you noticed that BYU Physics Department for just a few days, the Engineering Department for about 3 months, had statements challenging whether the peer review on my paper had been done correctly. And I believe that he influenced that. I have learned to appreciate the value of silence. Again, I interpret that as meaning shut up. Even, look at this, even in the case of superior data and information. That's amazing. You still want to be quiet about it. Wow. In contrast to studying things that could cause harm in some unexplained way, he had some comments, but the whole focus could be changed. And he goes through an idea here about something that could be researched. It's kind of clever, really. A low-velocity rocket fired from a helicopter to disperse fire retardants on a floor. Study this out. And guess what? I would be happy to contact the head, Tom Hunter, and the head of Homeland Security to see if funding for BYU could be found for research options for this purpose. His name, I've been asked that. And let me tell you something. If I tell Alex his name, if this guy, look, recently, ever since, when I started talking about thermite, I reported at a meeting of the Utah Academy of Sciences, Arts and Letters. Okay, my work on, so that was a formal scientific meeting. And that's why I feel, by the way, that information is public and I can now share it. You see, that's kind of the rule in science. First, at a scientific meeting, then you can go public. Anyway, at that conference, there was a reporter from Deseret News. She reported on my findings about thermite, which I'm discussing now. And that was in the newspaper. And it actually was quite a nice article, the thermite, and no tagans in thermite. She put that in there. He wrote, just like that, And he said, Jones should not be talking about thermite. And because it might tell terrorists something they don't already know. Now look, thermite, that was his excuse. And he says, again, I can get this stopped. And he threatened action. He didn't say legal action, but I assume that's what he meant. But he hasn't followed through. But, you know, so, yeah, so I learned something from that. They don't like things, they being he, but I'm extending that a little bit. They don't like things in the media. That makes me want to get things in the media. And they don't like, right? and yeah, so, I mean, I'm not totally, look, and the other thing they don't like is a discussion about thermite. So guess what? I'm going to talk about thermite every chance I get. Now, if he comes through with some legal action or such, you know, I mean, he's trying to get me to shut up here. And again, notice this grant, and he mentioned this in his most recent one too. You know, we could get you a grant. He mentions this now to a number of people at BYU. We could get Jones, and why would he do that? I mean, he's trying to get me to shut up. He says, you know, it's ridiculous. But he says, but we can still get you a grant. And notice at the bottom, naturally, you're most likely to achieve the greatest success in such an effort, in other words, getting this money from Homeland Security, if you change course rather than continue to pursue your present effort. Name I will reveal if he does anything else that's... and I'll tell Alex, he'll broadcast the name. He'll get thousands of emails. That's my little, in my pocket, secret, you see, right? and if you're listening out there, Mr. Mechanical Engineer who lives in the Bay Area, as I understand, then you know, I'm not exactly threatening, but I'm not responding to your threat favorably. I will disclose your name, and I don't want your money from Homeland Security either. Thanks, Ed. That's true. Okay, thanks. Okay, now, look, so you see what was going on at BYU. We're getting a lot of pressure. Now, the question that arises frequently, has BYU muzzled you? Somebody said yes, but the answer really is no. This guy, this outsider, made arguments to have my paper withdrawn, as you've seen some of them. There were some others. But BYU, in particular my dean, supported my right to publish and said, look, this is academic freedom. This question about peer review was settled. And the way that was done, actually, my paper went to another publication, David Griffin's, and it went through another set of peer reviews, this time by 4 PhDs, and that settled the question. The college dean did suggest to me that he personally would not give media interviews, and I went with that for a while. You may have noticed I wasn't giving, but recently, since this guy, this outsider, this mechanical engineer, has told me to not talk about thermite, I've decided I will give media interviews. Okay. Now the latest results, which I would call compelling. But remember, these aren't yet published in a peer-reviewed journal, so I have to be a bit cautious as a scientist. And here we're back to this material, previously molten metal. Here's the data, which very few have seen now outside of BYU. And this is what that Professor Campbell was reacting to. On the left, we see abundant iron. Now the white means there's a lot of this metal, and the dark regions are where there is less of it. This is what you expect from a melt with other stuff in there. You expect regions of high concentration, which is the white bands, and then low concentration, which is the dark. And then on the right, you see aluminum, but it's definitely there, but in spots. It's not mostly aluminum, it's mostly iron. We can strictly rule out molten aluminum from the planes in this material. It's a big chunk, remember, from the South Tower. Secondly, we see, and there's iron again, upper left. On the right is chromium. And what that is just noise. There's no pattern. This is just background noise. In other words, there's very little chromium. Now, steel has a fair amount of chromium in it. We're confident that we can rule out molten structural steel, but we don't make that statement conclusively yet until we do some more checking. On the other hand, there's a great deal of manganese, but notice it anti-correlates. In other words, where there's less iron, I don't know, I do have a pointer, but 2 screens. Let's just try it over here. So the white regions, more iron, but then there's less manganese. And when there's less iron, dark regions, there's more manganese. That's an anti-correlation, which suggests that the manganese is not from steel. It's from something else. Now, potassium permanganate, which has manganese in it, is commonly used in thermites, aluminothermics. Here we see aluminum, upper left, potassium, again, potassium permanganate, you'd expect potassium, and sulfur in spots. So we see all of those. Most of the sulfur you would expect to be burned off, by the way, but there's still some there. And as Jim Fetzer mentioned, is in my paper too. Another group, and this is in FEMA Appendix C. You won't find it in the NIST report, which comes later, but for some reason they just don't mention it. This is that sulfidation, in other words, sulfur attacking steel at high temperatures, was found by Professor Barnett and Sisson. There's a little group there, Massachusetts. Good work. Evidence of severe high temperature corrosion, attack on the steel, including oxidation, we do see oxygen, and sulfidation, we do see sulfur, with subsequent intergranular melting. This is sulfur makes it melt at lower temperatures. Boom, it slices right through. Was readily visible, they report. And this is completely consistent with our observation and becomes a second corroboration, which in science now becomes compelling, if not conclusive. We're somewhere between compelling and conclusive right now. Now, I'll share with you there's some other elements which I'm not going to share because I just want to check them out first. But manganese in abundance, and lower right, you see the fluorine. Now, where in the heck does fluorine come from? That's unusual to have fluorine. Chlorine, yes, but fluorine, where does that come from? Well, in thermites, fluorine is present in an oxidizer, which we can all read this, a polytetrafluoroethylene. Okay, the fluoro in there is fluorine. And the potassium, manganese, and fluorine are often present then in the residue. Have you checked other samples? Yes. This sample clinging to this structure. And by the way, this is one of the things I think that was overlooked by these fellows that destroyed the structural steel. They allowed steel to be put into monuments all over the place. There's dozens of these, and there is this previously molten material clinging to these structures. I consider that those are there, they're out in the public. So this brave woman, again, I'm not going to tell her name right now, but she, let's see if I can, anyway, she got a sample. Her husband actually put the monument together. He was a welder, and she saw this stuff clinging to it, and she said, well, it's going to be out in the weather. That stuff might get washed off or whatever. She gathered that off and put it in a bucket. When she heard about my paper online, she sent me this bucket of stuff, and it's got all this molten metal in there. Oh man, isn't that something? And that's the way we're proceeding. But we know where this came from. The provenience is clear from the World Trade Center. And this stuff has in it iron, sulfur, again, potassium, manganese, calcium. These are some of the, was it arson using thermite? Well, these are some of the characteristics of thermite. This is a way to cut through steel of substantial thickness. An invention goes back to 99 using thermite. This quoting, invention uses thermite, cut through thick stuff, substantial. These are super thermite. Remember what that is? Real fine thermite, so it's explosive. And this, you put electric current through this match. It's called an electric match, put an electric current through the wire, the super thermite's out here, and that will touch off then the thermite or super thermite. If you want an explosion, use super thermite. If you want it to cut without an explosion, like in the South Tower, you use regular thermite. It's clear. Oh boy, there's so much we can talk about. I'm going to have to skip some of this though. Research by, look, I think this is neat though. Chicago meeting, Kevin, he said I could talk about this briefly. Sol gels, these gels that are used to hold the aluminum particles and the iron oxide. And these materials now can be cast. And so you can cast this stuff. Now it's explosive. You put it right on the steel, man. Touch that off. You know, radio control to a super thermite match. Touch that off, man. I mean, we're figuring this out, how this could be done easily. And then we're seeing traces of this. But wait, with this stuff, this sol gel leaves this trace. This residue is not always there, but it would certainly be consistent with the use of these sol gels. And so guess what? Little drum roll. This is an important one. Okay, here it comes. One molecule, is quoting now from a newspaper article, EPA's Eric Schwartz. One molecule described by EPA's Eric Schwartz was present at levels, quote, that dwarfed all others. 1,3-diphenyl propane. You're going to hear more about this. We've never observed it in any sampling we've ever done, Schwartz said. Now, they've looked at a few burning buildings before. All right? They never saw 1,3-DPP before. Here it is, and it's characteristic of these sol gels used with thermite. Folks, we are nailing this, I think. You know that. Now I have to throw in, since that's Kevin Ryan's work, he says, I'm still working on it. You know, I really want to nail it. But here's some more sent by a friend, pictures at a memorial park. Notice the cut. If this was cut by, look at that, big jags. This is what you expect with thermite, holes in regions and this molten slag. See, we want to get some of that stuff and analyze it. We now have two different sources, but here's another one. Here's another one. Now, see that molten slag on this structural steel? Yeah, get it quick. I agree with you. And that's why I'm not saying where it's from. And I debated whether even to show these photos, but too late. We'll skip that one. I might get some... look, there are dozens, I think hundreds of these memorial parks around the world. So we have these photos. If mysteriously it disappears, that's more evidence, you know. So anyway, we've got enough probably, but I still like more. Okay. Can you prove arson with thermite? I'm quoting now from Materials Engineering, MEI, what is it? It's some group that does this study of thermite arson. This gives me hope. They say, in recent years, the use of thermite reactions as incendiary, what's that? Fires, burns slowly, and so on. Okay, as incendiary devices has gained popularity with arsonists because they are easily ignited, like with the super thermite match. They burn quickly, in fact, as quick as you want, really, can generate a very intense heat in excess of 4,000 Fahrenheit. By the way, this is published before 9/11. These substances are a mixture of copper oxide, of course you can use, I mentioned, iron oxide, molybdenum oxide, etc., potassium permanganate, other chemicals which can be homemade or purchased commercially, no tagans. Quoting out of the same article, when thermite reaction compounds are used to ignite a fire, they produce a characteristic burn pattern, which is white hot reaction region, white plume of aluminum oxide coming off, and then, the ash, and then the yellow molten metal, right, which later solidifies. They leave behind evidence. Boy, do they ever. These compounds are rather unique in their chemical composition. They contain common elements, depending on what you use, copper, iron, calcium, silicon, of course some aluminum always, but also more unusual elements such as vanadium, titanium, tin, fluorine, and manganese. And we see some other unusual ones, which, for reasons you can imagine, I'm not going to go into here in detail. But as we nail these, then I'll have them. We'll publish them. While some of these elements are consumed in the fire, many are also left behind in the residue, and that's what we're looking for. Now this is hope. MEI has conducted energy dispersive spectroscopy. Minute traces is all you need. That little chunk I held up earlier today. I got it here, but it's just a little piece of this molten stuff. Identifying the presence of these chemical elements. We use that technique too. The results, coupled with visual evidence, which we reviewed just a minute ago, flowing metal, white ash, etc., provide absolute certainty that thermite reaction compounds were present, indicating the fire was deliberately set and not of natural causes. In other words, this really gives hope. You know, we're not talking about holograms or something, which could be proven. We're talking about hard physical evidence, you know, that we can analyze and nail this, and it has been done. So what's happening is turned into an arson investigation, is really what it is. Okay, let's see, time-wise, you guys are getting tired. Let me slip ahead to some of the more interesting stuff. We want to publish this, of course. Oh, scientific studies often motivate other investigations. Example, the blue dress. Okay, there was a certain scientific evidence, hard evidence, that came from that. And I really do think that already right now, the data are sufficiently compelling at this moment to motivate an immediate investigation of certain parties besides the 19 hijackers. Okay. Now, see, Jim addressed this Chronicle of Higher Education. I just want to mention, this is an article that just came out, but I'm quoting this Jean Gravois. Look down at the bottom. What happens when science tries to function in a fringe crusade? In other words, this is what we are, I guess, to him. But heck, I was really disappointed, John. I showed him this evidence on thermite, at least he was there at the Chicago meeting. I have some new stuff, which I've shown you, of course, but anyway, he comes and just calls it a fringe crusade. I'm disappointed in this guy. So, do I believe in fringe conspiracy theory? Okay, I'm quoting from Dick Cheney. To me, this is conspiracy theory. We saw on 9/11, 19 men hijack aircraft with airline tickets and box cutters and killed more than 3,000 Americans in a couple of hours. Now, if you believe that, that is a conspiracy theory with very little support behind it, in my opinion. And so I renounce this conspiracy theory. How's that? I renounce this conspiracy. This, to me, is conspiracy theory. Now, I want to mention a story real quick. One of my heroes from the past, Polycarp. He's a bishop of the early Christian church and lived in Smyrna. Do you know about Polycarp? I see you nodding a little bit, but okay, he's a great guy. Let me tell you about him. So here's this bishop. This was a time of empire that he lived in. Wouldn't that be awful to live in a time of empire? And the Romans, as you know, were persecuting and killing the Christians. Now, he's the bishop of this congregation, so Roman leader, soldier guy, what should I call him? I think he was legionnaire, centurion, that's the word. Hauls him off, and they had this crowd of people gathered, Romans, persuasion, and they want to see this guy killed. And so he gives him a chance. He says, if you will denounce, this is a parallel now I'm drawing, if you will denounce Jesus Christ, I'll let you free. And Polycarp said, well, I'm an old man. He was about 80. It was about 90 AD. And he said, as soon as I learned of Jesus Christ, he became my friend, and I will not renounce him. And so the Roman centurion said, well, I'll give you another chance. If you will denounce the atheists, I will set you free. And you see, to the Romans, the Christians were atheists because the Romans had their own gods. We call it a myth now, but they called it their gods. It was a very powerful myth in their society. Like 9/11, okay? And so what the centurion was doing, he said, I want you to renounce the Christians, you know, because they're atheists as far as I'm concerned. But here's what Polycarp did. He swept his hand across the Roman Empire people gathered there in the stadium. And he said, I denounce the atheists. I denounce the conspiracists. You see the parallel there? Okay, so that's the way I feel about it. That's the way I feel about it now. So I feel pretty strongly about it. And I did write some words to this. Maybe we'll do that sometime. But it's kind of, do you guys, who says Chicago? You want to do it real quick? Do we have time? And then I'll skip to the end. Okay, let's do it. Here's what you have to do to hear that. So we're going to sing words to that song. It is fun. I like this, and I'll get you into it. And every breath. Okay. Now this is Dale Tippett singing now to this. He actually sings better than I do. So we're going to sing along with Dale, and the words are kind of. He's quoting Silverstein.
I said, you know, we've had such terrible loss of life.
Such terrible loss of
I just want to
life.
sing to us this
Decided
poem.
just to pull it.
Building 7 came down.
Here we go.
It fell straight and fast. Not hit by a plane. How do you explain the truth we'd like to know?
Okay, now you got to get into this now. Come on.
The 9/11 Commission ignored the 7 collapse. FEMA could not explain, but say Iraq's to blame. It's our nation's shame. Was thermite used? And who set the fuse? Molten metal came down. It burned pools underground. No air defenses that day. Who opened up the gates? Who let them fly right through? A few clearly knew, made money on puts too. Since then, times, truth and laws without a trace. I dream at night, people wake up and embrace the neocons we can actually replace. I'm feeling bold and I hope the truth will be told. I keep on crying, people, sheeple,
It's quite plausible that explosives were pre-planted in all 3 buildings and set off after the 2 plane crashes, which were actually a diversion tactic. Muslims are probably not to blame for bringing down the World Trade Center buildings after all.
Can we stop this? We're getting prepared, so we won't be scared. We can tell another, we can help each other. We're a worldwide brother. He whispered in your ear that we're under attack. Why did you just sit? Did not know I'm surprised or care for children's lives. Well, we care for them. Another 9/11 will not get you to heaven. We want the killing you end. Another 9/11 will not get you to heaven. We want the wars to end.
It's a hypothesis to be tested. That's a big difference from a conclusion. It was not even hit by a jet.
Every war you make, every vow you break, every time you lie, don't you watching you? Every war you make, every vow you break, every time you lie, God is watching you. Every war you make, every vow you break, every time you lie, don't you watching you? Every war you make,
Thank you. Thanks. Hey, thanks. Now, now look, I'm not quite done though, so but that, I know you're probably right. But there's one more thing I want to go into, if you can bear with me a little bit. So that was fun, wasn't it? And yeah, somehow I'm sure we can. Alex, work with him on that. We can get that. Yeah, what do you say? Go. Yeah. You can, he was saying don't tell people about thermite. I mean, you can buy the stuff on eBay. Did you know? I mean, it's not like it's a secret. And obviously the terrorists know about this stuff. So, okay, let's go to about here. Okay, so we'll start with Ledeen. There's a lot of good stuff here. Ledeen is one of the neocons. They call themselves neoconservatives, you know. They came out, well, there's some history. They came out, most of them were liberals and call themselves neocons now. Ledeen is one of these, Michael Ledeen. Has the ear of Karl Rove. This is out of a BBC report. His view on the war on terror is clear. Ledeen said, Iraq is just one battle in the larger war. Bringing down the regime in Iran is the central act. This is scary. You can see these guys are after it. You can see the plan, you know. In his book, Ledeen said, this is chilling to me. In order to achieve the most noble achievements, the leader may have to enter into evil. This is the chilling insight that has made Machiavelli so feared, admired, and challenging. I don't admire Machiavelli. I believe in doing good, not murdering people for some. You know, it's ends justify the means. It's an old and very misleading philosophy. Richard Pearl, middle, we'll jump down there, again, BBC. For justice and liberty to prevail in the world, force, he's talking about killing, sometimes has to be used. It's nice to sit around and say we're in Europe, we believe in the rule of law, we believe in the United Nations, but this is before Iraq, you know. But Saddam Hussein is there, he's a dictator, and he has weapons of mass destruction, and are you going to do something about it or not? You see these guys' philosophy and how much they influence our policy, these neoconservatives. Could it happen again? Unfortunately, and that has been discussed, but here's a quote you may not have seen. This, believe it or not, is by Zbigniew Brzezinski. In the LA Times, April 13th, if there is another terrorist attack in the United States, you can bet your bottom dollar there will also be immediate charges that Iran was responsible in order to generate public hysteria in favor of military action. Well, I think he's right, but notice what earlier in this article, talk of a U.S. strike in Iran, this is the title of the article, is eerily reminiscent of the run-up to the Iraq War. Yeah. Well, he knows what's going on. He was opposed to attacking Iran, which is why he wrote this op-ed. Surely they wouldn't lie to us. Here I discuss the dust, and people have talked about this earlier. This dust is very dangerous stuff. It was known to be so. The White House directed the EPA to add and delete information based on how it should be released. In other words, the scientists said this stuff is toxic, highly dangerous. That was reported to the EPA. EPA initially, let me back up, had warnings. But at the White House's direction, now this is the National Security Council, the environmental EPA gave New Yorkers misleading assurances, these are also called lies, that there was no health risk from the debris-laden air. The White House convinced EPA to add reassuring statements and delete cautionary ones. That to me is already treasonous. You're hurting your own. You're supposed to defend people against all enemies, right? Domestic as well as foreign. Okay, so a lot of people are sick, unfortunately. About 15,000, BBC report April of this year. And some have died. Is this truth? No. Is it caring for others? No. Long-term effect. you know, this business of willing to actually, it's human sacrifice if you think about it. What Alex mentioned, the Aztecs, you know, I mean, this is it's weird. Oh, I just threw this in at the last two. Do we torture detainees? See, President Bush said we don't torture prisoners. And just shortly after he said that, I heard that on the news, there was the general in charge of Abu Ghraib who said, well, we made a distinction between prisoners and extremists. You see? So when he says we don't torture prisoners, well, we do. He didn't go to the next step, but we do make a distinction, and extremists don't have this guarantee. I got to get myself one of those black hats. I think they're cool. Okay, how do you feel? Let's see, not so good. Let's just read.
National Security Council meeting is one of O'Neill's most startling revelations.
From the very beginning, there was a conviction that Saddam Hussein was a bad person and that he needed to go.
He says that going after Saddam Hussein was topic A 10 days after the inauguration.
I swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies.
From the very first instance, it was about Iraq. It was about what we can do to change this regime.
Now, everybody else thought that grew out of 9/11.
No.
But this book says it was day one of this administration.
Day one, these things were laid and sealed.
As Treasury Secretary, O'Neill was a permanent member of the National Security Council. He says in the book he was surprised at the meeting that questions such as why Saddam and why now were never asked. It's all about finding a way to do it. That was the tone of it. The president saying, go find me a way to do this.
For me, the notion of preemption, that the U.S. has the unilateral right to do whatever we decide to do, is a really huge leap.
You're giving me the impression that you're just going to be stunned if they attack you for this book. And they're going to say, I predict, you know, it's sour grapes. He's getting back because he was fired.
I will be really disappointed if they react that way, because I think they'll be hard put.
But are you prepared for it?
Well, I don't think I need to be, because I can't imagine that I'm going to be attacked for telling the truth. Why would I be attacked for telling the truth?
He was attacked, yes. In case you were wondering. Isn't that, it's amazing. I mean, it's so many people. Obviously, the Constitution does not justify preemptive war. And oil, you know, they talk, this is about the same book, which is written by Susskind, who's on the tape there. Planning and vision peacekeeping troops in Iraq, war crime tribunals, and even divvying up Iraq's oil wealth. So, you know, a lot of, there's this big lie principle. We'll skip over that. Patrick Henry. We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty, which we are engaged in? Are we disposed to be of the number of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know it now. Okay. I'll skip all this good stuff. And the Constitution. I've already talked about preparing for the worst. I just want to remind you again. It's something a lot of people in Utah are doing for various reasons. But water, food. Just, you know, 500 pounds of grain, wheat, oats, whatever you like. You can get that for about $200 right now, or less. And that'll sustain you if you've got water. And, you know, a few other things, salt and a few medications. But it'll sustain you for about a year, 500 pounds. Great. It's only $200, you know. And, by the way, you can cook it in a solar cooker if they okay. The cooker, you have to, I'm not selling, I have a few left, but I'm giving those to, like the guys in Mali. I really don't want to sell them, but online it tells you how to make it. It's very easy, cardboard, aluminum foil, or even a windshield reflector. You just cut it the way I say there. Solarcooking.org, Google on BYU. You'll get the paper. Okay, now finally, this is my last topic. Are there any precedents? And of course, Alex's video went through this, so I'll go through it quickly. 1898, Spanish-American War was started on the pretext that the U.S. battleship Maine was sunk by Spain. Later, after the war was over, it was determined that this was a coal fire in the Maine that sunk it. William Randolph Hearst told his reporter, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war." And, you know, this is interesting how the media promoted the war to make money. It's just incredible. I'm sure that wouldn't happen today. No. But anyway, I assume they'll give us a chance to explain our side of this. Might end the war, though. Let's hope. Soon, but here's what happened back in 1898. Soon a rallying cry could be heard everywhere. Papers, streets, halls of Congress. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. That was the cry. Catchy, and that's what happened. We got into a war with Spain. The Mukden incident, Japan wanted to get Manchuria's resources, part of China. To have a pretext, the Japanese army blew up tracks of their own railway near Mukden, blamed the sabotage on Chinese soldiers. Oops, an I is missing. Soldiers. And of course, that is how they had the pretext for war. This was discovered after the war was over. Reichstag fire was covered by Alex, started by the Germans in their own Reichstag building, the German parliament, using incendiary fluids. By the way, that reminded me of thermite, and touched off a massive blaze. And it was blamed on the communists, and it was one of the ways in which Hitler gained power and took away the civil rights of the Germans. The Himmler operation, also we mentioned, it was blamed on the Poles and was pretext for attacking Poland. That was found out after. And this, by the way, is part of World War II. You know, a huge war. And this big lie that Poland had attacked Germany was the pretext for the Second World War, along with the Reichstag fire. Okay, do we see a pattern here? I'm sure we do. So I decided to carry on with that. Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. Remember the Reichstag fire, to hell with the commies. Remember the Mukden, to hell with China. You see, there's a... Remember the Polish attacks, to hell with Poland. Remember the Gulf of Tonkin, to hell with Vietnam. That was reviewed by both, Webster and Alex. So now we just fill in the blanks. Remember the false flag operation, to hell with the country blamed. You see, this is the pattern. See? And remember 9/11, to hell with Afghanistan and Iraq. Remember, this part's still coming, to hell with Iran. You see how that works? Now, this is nothing new, people. This goes way back. And so people think it's awful, our country. Well, we have done it. We did it with Maine. We did it with the Gulf of Tonkin. And, this has got to stop. Now, there have been many false flag events in history. Remember, I wrote this before I saw Alex's thing. But we're thinking along the same lines. According to historians, and Alex, I checked, he agrees, never before in history has the truth about such events, false flag events, been brought up before the war ended. And it's our chance to make history, to bless our children and grandchildren. It does sound like Alex, but I assure you this is completely independent. I wrote this, Okay. Now I predict in this case that we will get the truth out during these wars. Not that we want to prolong these terrible wars, but we want to get at the truth. Now, this is my last slide coming up, and I'd like you to read it with me if you agree with this sentiment. This is kind of like an affirmation or a prayer or a statement of purpose. And if you'll read it with me, we say, "This time, before the war is over, we will get the truth out." Thanks. Okay, thank you.